Assalamu alaikum and welcome to 5 W's of English Literature. Today's video is Classicism and Romanticism in Shakespeare's plays on the request of my subscriber. Classicism and Romanticism are two schools of thoughts, theories and tendencies that appears and dominates the English literature throughout the history alternately. Classicism and Romanticism are opposite to each other and have different qualities from each other. This video is an effort to find out to what extent Shakespeare implied either classic or romantic notions in his works. This is the part 1 of today's video, Classicism in Shakespeare's plays. Based on Greek and Roman sources, classicism is characterized by an emphasis on balance, proportion, and order. To begin with Shakespeare, we may quote Ben Jonson's familiar words of comment upon Shakespeare, "Not of an age, but for all time." This comment summarizes quite well the fame and popularity of Shakespeare. However, it is interesting to note that in addition to much praise, Shakespeare received very heavy negative criticism during the 17th and 18th centuries. The most prominent objection during this time was that Shakespeare violated the unities of time, place, and action. These are some extracts of objections made on Shakespeare to violate the rules of classicism. In 1769, the Monthly Review was worried about Shakespeare's neglect of the unities and attributed it to the coarse taste of the time. Some early critics defending Shakespeare appeared general comment without greatly detailed argument. The British magazine 1767 announced, with regard to the unity of time, which some rigid critics look upon as a matter of such great importance, it, Julius Caesar, is remarkably defective. Another objection of rejecting the unities in Shakespearean plays was to argue that nature is greater than rules. On this basis, the unities were dismissed as mere pedantry, and the accent was placed on the magic of the scene and characters as triumphant over all rules. Richard Whately put delineation of character far above the unities in importance and added in his remarks on some of the characters of Shakespeare. Experience has shown that however rigidly and however rightly the unities of action, time and place have been insisted on, they may be dispensed with, and the magic of the scene may make the absurdity invisible. Most of Shakespeare abounds with instances of such a fascination. It is said about Shakespeare that he did not follow the major principles of artistic creation. With respect to the major principles of artistic creation in classicism, Horace had said on the art of poetry, "The artist's creation should be harmonized, plausible, and creative. He should not allow mockery to trample his work's dignity and should therefore elude the introduction of trivialities. The artwork as a form should do its best to manifest the ideal. Thus, the representation of deformities or peculiarities is regarded as defective in imitation of the ideal." Here Bate renders the particular example of Alexander the Great, whose short stature was not represented in the works of the great Italian painters of the Renaissance. We will examine these rules of classicism in Shakespeare's play, The Winter's Tale. The story is not Shakespeare's own invention. It has a precedent in the Ovidian myth of Pygmalion, a greatly gifted sculptor. Pygmalion created the statue of the most perfect woman on the earth and fell in with her desperately. Eventually, his wish was fulfilled by Venus, who inspired life into the statue and graced their marriage by her presence. Our story is indeed quite seriously narrated and observes mentioned dignity characteristic of the classical art forms. The concept, a statue comes to life from the Ovidian story, is implied by Shakespeare in the final scene of The Winter's Tale, where Hermione, Leon's wife, who has been in hiding for 16 years, performs the role of a statue and gradually comes to life as a complete human being by Paulina's make-believe role as a conjurer. Perhaps one could confidently say that Shakespeare made use of the Ovidian story, but one would doubt if his attitude toward the story was anything like Ovid's. That is why Shakespeare cannot be declared a totally classic-minded playwright for the transmutations he brought to the classic Ovidian story. Proclivity to the ideal, the sublime, and the perfect, despite the existence of real deformities, is closely interwoven with the aesthetic notions inherent in The Winter's Tale. Ideal imitation has so perfectly been done that Leon's calls Hermione's statue a royal piece, asserting that there is magic in its majesty. Here, idealization causes the statue to seem lifelike, masterly done. The very life seems warm upon her lip. The statue turns into the sublime, but Shakespeare does not halt there. He moves on with these classic notions up to the point where a turn of attitude could apparently be discerned. The statue gradually comes to life, which is not something new, based on the myth of Pygmalion. Nonetheless, Shakespeare's attitude here makes his version of the story very different from Ovid's. Shakespeare's mocking treatment of the plastic art form cannot be denied in The Winter's Tale, bestowing breath, sight, warmth, and motion on a statue is a sort of resurrection. Still, resurrection per se is the derision of the whole notion of sculpture. Hermione, as statue, is originally a human being, playing the role of a stone piece of artwork. In other words, Hermione has never been a real piece of sculpture, but just a fake, but simultaneously living one. Thus the sublime, the ideal, and the serene of sculpture are dissolved into the mortal flesh, the real and the dynamic. This reminisces Bakhtin's distinction between the classical and the grotesque. In this play, too, the existence of wrinkles on Hermione's brow implies the grotesquerie of the degenerating body in Bakhtin's theory. At this point, it may come across the mind that Shakespeare might have intended to critique the whole classical notion of art form. Antony and Cleopatra. Shakespeare's another tragedy also presents some concepts that are against to classicism. While classicism is characterized by objectivity and is strictly opposed to emotions and imagination, Antony and Cleopatra represents the human passion, love on its peak. Critics view this play as a kind of lyrical poem which exalts love as the greatest value in life and which shows love triumphant over death and the world. To these critics, the deaths of Antony and Cleopatra project the diadem of love and show these characters as examples of vincit omnia amor all time. Critics see the actions of the lovers in the play as an exposure at human weakness and corruption. These critics do not see love glorified here. Rather, they see two people who die because they give themselves over to the sensual matters of the world and forget moral principles and duty to country. An unnamed American writer called Cleopatra the Shakespeare's best female portrait. He continued by remarking, "It is her mind, the strength of her passion, the fervor and fury of her love, the bitterness of her hatred, and the desperation of her death, which takes so strong a hold on the imagination." Here we can see the full projection of emotions and imagination in Antony and Cleopatra, that is opposed to classicism. Dear viewers, this is the end of part 1. Classicism in Shakespeare's plays. If you like my video, please hit the like button and subscribe my channel. And don't forget to watch second part of this video, Romanticism in Shakespeare's plays. Till then, take care of yourself. Allah Hafiz.